Today we're talking about a time machine.
A time machine?
A time machine.
Time machine.
A time. Its uses throughout fiction and what you should do in terms of time in your own life. Bleh. Before you heard of the idea of a time machine, it's likely you actually conceptualized a time machine by means of your own cognition as a response to adverse situations. In your childhood, there was an event in which you wished so desperately to reverse. You would observe that time isn't malleable. By no means might this thing be undone. The idea of a time machine might be as old as the first mistake ever made, and thus dates back to the earliest people. For most of human history, it was held that time travel could only be explained by magic if used in fiction, or by God himself existing outside of time. This was until the emergence of the genre of science fiction. In 1818, Mary Shelley published what is considered the first piece of science fiction ever made, Frankenstein. This revolutionary book pioneered the idea of achieving wild fictitious ideas by means of scientific inventions. This genre would even contribute to literal advancements in science. Many attribute the popularization of automatic doors to its earliest portrayal in the original 1966 Star Trek. The first instance of time travel being associated with science would be 77 years after Frankenstein. In 1895, H.G. Wells published The Time Machine. His book takes, at the time, a very new approach to time travel. The narrative begins at a dinner party in London, England. The protagonist abruptly enters the scene battered from some wild experience. Nearly the entirety of the rest of the book is a reiteration of this man's experience, which led him to his arrival at the dinner party. It's explained that there are dimensions in space. You can move forward and backward, side to side, and up and down. And the science somehow grasped time as the fourth dimension, and he discovered how to move about time as an ordinary man moves about space. A week prior to the dinner party, the scientist embarks on a journey in his time machine, and he decides to venture into the future. And true to his theory of the dimension, the time machine only moves through time and not space. As he presses on in time, the seasons change outside his window. A little further in time, and his laboratory decays. He increases his rate of travel, and he eventually finds what was once his lab to be buried under rock by means of a catastrophic war which decimated London. Further into the future, he presses, and the rocks which contained him eventually fall away. He stops the time machine in the year 802,701. Man in this time had become without race, and had become enslaved by zombie Wookiees. The scientist eventually reclaims his time machine and makes his way back to his own time, so that he could share his story with the other gentlemen at the dinner party. Whilst traveling through time as measured in years, the scientist still experiences time, be it in London in the 1800s or 800,000 years in the future. Time still flows through him, as each of his previous actions is preceded by another, which cannot alter the previous. The book warrants deep consideration of economics, environmentalism, and love. This piece of literary excellence embodied the principles of interesting fiction, connecting something unimaginable to something relatable, so that the audience might enter your fiction across a bridge of relatability. And thus this became a golden standard in science fiction. The popularity of the time machine in fiction would increase in the 1900s. 65 years after the publication of the time machine, it was adapted into film in 1960, providing the clips that you see in this video. It's not flashy, and obviously the special effects are a product of their time, but I promise you it's worth the watch, especially if you don't want to read the book. A brief side quest from science, but still within the realm of fiction. One of the greatest writers ever to live would begin creating fantasy stories during this century. A man by the name of J.R.R. Tolkien, most famous for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. After his death, his son Christopher would publish a collection of his broader lore into a book published in 1977, The Similar Alien. In the first chapter, Tolkien writes about the god of his universe, Edu Iluvatar, and his children, elves and men, which inhabit his creation, Arda, in which Middle-earth exists. Now the children of Iluvatar are elves and men, the firstborn and the followers. And amid all the splendors of the world, its vast halls and spaces, and its wheeling fires, Iluvatar chose a place for their habitation in the deeps of time, and in the midst of the innumerable stars. Whew! So that Tolkien need not roll over in his grave, it's important that I mention that Tolkien hated allegory. His fictional ideas of time are not meant to be directly applied to reality. But this quote raises an interesting idea, that God is outside of time in a way that even the time machines are unable to grasp. God can observe time like you could observe a chess game. The players are bound by its rules, but you could come along and flip over the board should you please.
I've been sent back until my task is done.
Back to science fiction, the time machine would have its next dramatic emergence in 1984 with the Terminator and in 1985 with Back to the Future. These movies experiment with traveling back in time in order to change something about the future. In the Terminator, Arnold is sent back in time to terminate Sarah Connor, the mother of the leader of the Resistance in the future. Fortunately, the good guys send someone back in time as well, and together the Terminator is defeated. The idea in these movies is that altering the past changes the future, and this would be the way time travel would be considered for the rest of the 1900s and all the way up until 2019. It seems to be forgotten just how significant Avengers Endgame was to our society. When the credits rolled on Infinity War in 2018, everyone was left distraught at the loss of their favorite heroes. Thanos did defeat the Avengers in the comics, but we didn't think the directors would actually do it in the movie. How would the Avengers defeat Thanos in the next movie? Would they go and try to take the time stone back? The opening scene threw us off even more. The stones were destroyed and Thor killed Thanos. 5 years later, by means of Ant-Man and a random rat, Tony Stark would invent time travel. However, they describe time travel differently from anyone up to this point.
Changing the past doesn't change the future. Think about it. If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future. And your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future.
Exactly.
We get a better grasp of the time travel throughout the movie. When after the Avengers go back in time and retrieve the Infinity Stones, they must return them in time afterward. Captain America does this and remains in the past where his heart belonged.
No, I don't think I will.
However, Cap's life wasn't erased. All the things he did still happened. They just used the things from the past to change the future. Had they not restored the past by returning the stones and Mjolnir, the flow of time would have shattered. In the next Spider-Man movie, we discover that all the people whom Thanos had snapped out of existence returned right where they had left off.
Including our own Midtown High, was wiped from existence. But then, 8 months ago, a band of brave heroes brought us back. They called it the Blip.
But the time wasn't erased, and those who survived the snap had all aged 5 years. Avengers Endgame took a third approach to time travel. The past is unchangeable, nor should it be changed, but the future is determined by what we do today. If you invented a time machine today, what would you do? Go to the past or go to the future? My recommendation? Do nothing! Even if you trekked into the future or the past, your life would still be existing in the present. The past cannot be altered, but it serves to be learned from. So learn about the past, but don't bother trying to change it. The future is determined by what we do today. What do you want your life to look like? Do you have a family with land in the country? Do you watch the sun set behind the love of your life? Do you sing songs around a campfire under the stars?
Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present.
Fall in love with today. Now frick off.